Thank you and welcome to the inaugural New York Black and African Literature Festival. I think it's deeply fitting that we begin our journey here with a conversation on coalition building and movement ecology. Before the performances, before the evening ceremonies, we ground ourselves in the practice of solidarity, because this festival at its heart is not only about art for art's sake, it is about art as infrastructure, about literature, culture, and imagination as tools for survival, connection, and transformation. The theme that carries us over the next 3 days is radical solidarity. It speaks to the urgency of building bridges across geographies, histories, and struggles, of expanding the we in our political conversations and our art. This panel calls us to think about what it takes to nurture movements that are resilient, sustainable, and inclusive, what we might call their ecology. So we are honored to be joined by thinkers and organizers who embody this work, people who have built organizations, mobilized communities, and carried forward traditions of resistance and care. Samson Itodo is a Nigerian lawyer, civic educator, and the executive director of YAGA Africa. He has been at the forefront of mobilizing young people in Nigeria to vote, to participate, and to lead, helping to lower the age of candidacy for political office through the groundbreaking Not Too Young to Run campaign. His work continues to demonstrate how movements can shape democratic participation from the ground up. Please welcome up Samson Itodo. Keep the applause going. Thank you. Omar Freilla is a community organizer and the founder of Green Worker Cooperative in the Bronx, the oldest Black-led worker cooperative development organization in the United States. For 2 decades, Omar has been a pioneer in linking racial, economic, and environmental justice, training and equipping communities to build cooperative economies rooted in self-determination and sustainability. Please welcome up Omar Freilla. And I'll get Dr. Saudi to load up a little closer. Dr. Saudi Garcia is a Dominican-American scholar and organizer whose work braids together political ecology, migration, and movement building. She has organized across environmental justice, labor, feminist struggles with a particular focus on how Caribbean and Latinx communities resist and reimagine power in the face of systemic violence. Please welcome Dr. Saudi Garcia. Thank you. And she walks fast, I like it. Together they bring perspectives from Nigeria, from the Bronx, from the Caribbean, each a site of experiment, struggle, and innovation in how we build and sustain collective power. This conversation is also a reminder that our stories, our poems, our books do not just exist apart from the movements that make our lives possible. They are in dialogue with them. They archive them, they spark them. So as we begin the festival, I invite you to listen with openness, to ask hard questions, and to imagine together what solidarities across class, race, gender, and nation can look like in this moment. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for the coalition building and movement ecology, Samson Itodo once again, Omar Freilla, and Saudi Garcia. Thank you so much.
Everybody, can you all hear me? Thank you all so much. Give it up for yourselves as well for being here today. This is a beautiful space, and it's going to be a beautiful weekend, and we're all just really excited to get started and have this conversation. My name is Saudi Garcia, as you know, and I think that it's important to begin by acknowledging that today, the reason why this conversation feels so pressing and so important is because there are multiple genocides going on around the globe. There is anti-democratic, fascist backsliding that is occurring around the globe, including right here in the US. And every single person in this room matters. Our kin matter, our relations matter. And we get to have a future we get to live. And the way that we can do that is through solidarity and through building coalitions. And so that is the reason why we're here, right? Why we might be motivated to be here, because the stakes feel so high. They feel higher than ever before. But we also get to dream and vision and demand and ask for more than we've ever had. So this is a very exciting conversation. I wanted to first start with a basic question, which is, what, in your opinion, is coalition building at its most basic? Either one. Everybody has a mic? Or? Oh, you all have mics. Okay, then. You don't have to share.
Thank you. So what is coalition building at its most basic? All right, well, I've been engaged in organizing for social justice in various different sectors for over 30 years, actually. And coalition building has always been a part of it. To me, when I say that, what I'm talking about is people coming from different sectors, maybe different organizations, different places. We're coming together because we're each engaged in a particular win that we want to see happen. There's a vision that we have for a victory, and we know that we're not going to get there alone. And so we form organizations for that purpose. We form coalitions, organizations of organizations. So maybe you think of that. It's organizations of organizations, people coming together in order to do more together than they can apart. So at a basic level, I would say that. I'm engaged in cooperatives and cooperative development now for about 25 plus years. And within cooperatives, these are people who are coming together to start businesses on their own. And what I have now, it's a co-op of co-ops. So we're a global network of black cooperatives and black-led organizations supporting each other, because we know that each of us individually don't have the resources to overcome 500 years of racial capitalism. And so there are things that are needed that we're only going to be able to create amongst ourselves by pooling our resources.
Well, thanks. I think the point you made is very clear. When you think about, say, coalition building, the whole word coalesce, it's the coming together. But to come together, there has to be shared interest. And that we are interested in a particular purpose. And so we come together to achieve that purpose. And coalition building is that process of doing the heavy lifting, of bringing people together, helping them articulate their purpose and their issues, and helping them convert the resources that they have into the power that they need to get the change that they want.
Amazing. So organization of organizations, facilitating people coming together, share purpose, share vision to build power. Amazing. So we are people of the African diaspora, and we are a storytelling people, as I was saying a little bit before. So I would love to ask you both to share any stories from your long-term experience building these coalitions. And I think also what would be helpful to know as well is any lessons learned from that work, any challenges you experience in doing that work.
Well, so first off, coalition building is not a tea party, because when you think about bringing people who have different backgrounds, different interests, making that interest one, and pushing the frontiers and getting results, it's the most difficult thing to do. And I think that's something community organizers grapple with. So in the field of social movement, of course, you talk about the collective action problem, that one person, even though we are all affected by a particular issue, but the opportunity cost of one person acting is so high that it disincentivizes them from acting. And so you want to get everybody, to act on a particular issue. I give a classic example in my previous work. In Nigeria, the age for running for office for the president is about 40. You have to be 40 to contest for president. You have to be 35 and 30 to get into the legislature. Every time young people are told they are the leaders, are there Nigerians here? Okay, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I'm sure you've heard, you are the leaders of tomorrow. You're the leaders of tomorrow, but you have old expired politicians taking bad decisions that continue to subject us to all forms of deprivation. But you have young people who they continually appoint as either aides, as publicists. And these young people thought, no, they are the leaders of today. They want to get into office and change things. But the Constitution didn't allow them to do so. So young people worked together. I was part of that movement, galvanizing young people to change the Constitution. And this is how young people changed the Constitution from the streets using their phones, but also building a coalition with an older generation that cared about generational equity. So that's one classic example. And today, in the Nigerian legislature, both at the state and the federal level, you had young people between 25 and 29. Other folks may not understand what it means in a context like Nigeria to have someone who is 26 run for office and win elections, especially in a context where your capacity for violence, your fiscal might is what determines how you get into office. So it's a big deal that a 26-year-old, is able to get into office, and that's possible because young people galvanized. If you think about the lessons that I've learned in this journey, is that one, coalition and movement building is about people. You need people. And to get people to act, you've got to understand people, and that people think about their interest first. So how do you make individual interest, the collective interest, in a way that it drives people to take action? The second point is you've got to build alliances. And in this contemporary world, we need to build unconventional alliances. And this is where the arts and culture play a critical role. This is where labor unions play a critical role. In fact, big tech companies also play a critical role, especially in instances where they have public interest at heart. So you've got to build those alliances. And I think the last basic lesson that one learned from coalition building and organizing is the fact that solidarity isn't a project. Solidarity is a way of life. And we have to stand in solidarity with each other all the time if you're going to achieve purpose. I think I'll stop there for now.
That was fantastic. I feel like I learned so much. Thank you. Yeah, you can clap. That was great. I feel like I learned a lot. So let anybody tell you that your social science and humanities degrees are not useful because you can use them for coalition building. Okay? Omar.
Yeah,
Any thoughts on lessons?
Yeah, there are two things that come to mind. Different kinds of coalition work with different kinds of people. So there was a point in time, when I was introduced, I was introduced as, founding or being part of an organization called Green Worker Cooperatives. I'm no longer with that organization, but it was one that I had founded. But there was a point in time, so that in that work, it was local, so an organization based in the Bronx, and at the same time, an organization that was cutting edge, doing work to help people in the Bronx and other parts of New York City, but people of color, start up worker cooperatives. So these are businesses that are owned and controlled by the people who work in them. And so that was the focus. And we were operating in the context of, that's not the way things are done. We live in a capitalist world, in, heart of capitalism. And so that's not where resources lay. And so, the organization itself had been struggling financially because trying to get support support from foundations, from donors, to help people to start up businesses that really move against capitalism, and having black people start up businesses that move against capitalism. I would run into these instances where funders would say things like, how many dog walkers and home cleaners can you possibly start? Like, that's the entire universe that we're capable of. So getting funds was really difficult. And so there came a point when an opportunity arose where there was another organization in the city that was engaged, had a pretty well, very highly structured and staffed social service agency that decided that cooperatives was something that they were interested in, that they wanted to see more of. And they had approached us to join them in a coalition to push the city of New York to adopt some policies. So I pulled together, there were a few of us from a few different organizations, we all came together, and we formed a coalition. And that coalition, the focus was, our goal was to get the city of New York to support the development of worker cooperatives in New York City, which is something that hadn't been done. And so we pushed, and we were successful. We were actually successful in record time. And we got the city of New York to the city council. For those of you who are in the city, we got the city council, the entire city council, to adopt their citywide initiative. Basically, every council member in the city has some funds that they set aside, and then there's money that's allowed for a citywide initiative. So we were able to convince all of the city council members to go along with this idea of putting all this big pot of money into this initiative to support worker cooperative development. And, it happened because of local organizing, really, because, our organization, myself, had a direct connection to a local council member in our district who knew the work that we were doing, and that was the one council member that was on board with this, and she became the champion and then pulled the rest of the city council to support us, with us pushing and getting people out from all over the city, testifying, doing this work, coming to council, going to public hearings, making statements, and so we were able to do that. And then, after we won, so we won that first year, so it was 1.2 million, and then we kept at it, and it's been an ongoing initiative since 2014. So every year it's grown, and now about every year the city puts in about $3 million to support this worker cooperative development. The challenge came in by the second year. The second year, I found myself frustrated. And second and third year frustrated because we were the only black-led organization. The other organizations in the mix were white-led organizations. And these other organizations, and some of them not even from New York City, but they were coming with approaches that, for me, were very paternalistic. Very top-down, very white savior, approach. And our approach was very bottom-up. We trust our people. We're going to support our people in starting up their own kinds of businesses. And so there was this clash of approaches and ideologies. And there are two directions that I saw we could have gone. We could have just gotten into a fight because we wound up having this conversation. How can we convince the city council next year to keep this going? What's going to be our argument? And some were proposing, well, our argument should be this particular approach is going to be the one that we take and that we adopt and that we push and say, this is the approach that works and this is the way we're going to do things. And I saw in that instant death and instant paternalism. And what I pushed back with was, no, that's not the approach we should be taking. We should be taking a big tent, big umbrella, big tent approach, that all of our approaches are contributing something. So we're talking about movement ecology, my background was in environmental science. And so the argument I made was, we are building an ecosystem. And so what makes us strong is that we each come from different angles, with different approaches, different perspectives, and we need that diversity in approaches in order to really have these worker cooperatives, at different scales and different levels that are really able to grow. And fortunately, that was the one, the others saw the light, and because the other path would have led to an instant split, would have led to not instant, but a split down the road eventually. And so this was more of, let's keep the big tent and be mindful that there are different approaches and just respect that. So that was one. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you. So actually, as follow-up questions, because I'm noticing like a bit of a tension between the need to all get on the same page, right? To have shared interests, to be clear about an ultimate goal, and the fact that there's also a necessity for envisioning something radically new, right? There's a tension, I think, from what I'm hearing, of like getting people on board and on the same page, but at the same time, these coalitions, I think, are trying to create a future reality of something that doesn't quite exist yet. So I'm curious about how you all, if you have the experience of needing to make that space and time to collectively vision, and that experimental space that's not necessarily just grounded in like the day-to-day procedural, like we're booking meetings, we're having certain conversations, we're making certain decisions, but is a space that's emergent to vision and think about broadly the future that you want. Does that question make sense? It's kind of a follow-up. How do you make time for that? How do you insert that into the process of coalition building, which is exhaustive, it sounds like?
So how do you make time? I think that first, if you're going to organize, perhaps just speaking to those who are in the room, if you're going to organize, you need to ask yourself whether organizing is a job for you or organizing is a way of life. And in today's world, organizing cannot be a job. It has to be a way of life for everyone, especially if you care about society, if you care about the injustices that are dominant in our society today. She says we are all feminists. That's what Chimamanda says. In some cases, we are all activists, because activism, it's not a job. And so my call is you need to see activism and working together with people to solve community problem as a way of life, as a spiritual calling, because the moment you're part of a society, there are certain commitments that you must make, to that society. I think let's start from there. So if you consider this as a duty and a responsibility, you make it a way of life for you. And it's as simple as how often do you get together to talk about issues that impact on your community? And if no one is doing the organizing, are you doing the organizing? Are you creating that space? Because this is a long journey. It's not a sprint, right? So you have to invest the time, you have to invest the resources, and you have to share power. Because going back to the earlier point, the fact that you have the convening power does not mean your individual vision is what should drive all the conversations that you have with members of your coalition. Maybe your contribution is just providing the space for people to just come think. And often people say we talk too much and they're tired of talking. I say no, that space for conversation provides clarity for a lot of people. That's where you build, what Marshall Ganz calls the public narrative, the story of self, us, and now. Because as people share, you're inspiring people, you're helping people understand that what they don't see as a problem is actually a problem, and that they can do something about it. So creating those spaces matter a lot. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to demonstrate why people need to take action and how the action they take will take them to their desired destination. And that requires real, conversation. It requires learning from each other. But I say that as organizers, creating that space is a lot of contribution. And how you deal with that space matters, because if you don't create a space for trust, so when you think about coalition building, there are certain principles that are non-negotiable, because coalition building itself is a product of relationship. And so if you're going to build relationships, those relationships have to be value-based relationships. So you need to create a space for trust where people are able to share without any fear of judgment or any intimidation. So I think that space for trust is important in coalition building, but also a space to just think outside the box. And in today's world, there are no boxes anymore.
Thank you for that. Omar?
Well, I heard in your question I heard in your question looking for how we can be centered on a vision, and how when does that happen, within a coalition. And my experience has been that organizations, both individual organizations and coalitions, of organizations, that the time when that actually does happen is in the beginning. And then we fall into a trap of feeling like we created a vision and then we spend the rest of our years just carrying it out. And it's easy to fall into that trap. I've been in that trap, in the past, and I realized that, there usually are still moments when people in organizations or in coalitions I've been part of have raised, we should really, somebody says we should really, ... Like, let's get together. What are we really about? What are we here for? If you've heard those questions come up, from people, and usually it's often sometimes new people that are coming in to a group or an organization, and there's sometimes written off was, well, they haven't been here before. But really, it also can be read as there's something missing in the space that is visible to other people who have newer eyes, that you've missed because you've got this previous vision that maybe isn't actually showing up. It's not showing up in the space. And so something is missing that has it not be there still. And so other people are present to it. So I think as I'm saying that, I was thinking maybe a way to trick myself is to think of, we have these artificial dates that we create of when we start a new cycle. Like, there's December 31st and everybody starts making resolutions and saying, how I'm gonna show up in the new year. We created that. So we can create points at any, along the way and say, okay, once a year, we're going to create a new vision, for ourselves, or we're going to evaluate our vision, or maybe every quarter, or every few months, or once a week, whatever it is. But I think that that's something that is often missing, that all people, all organizations, not just coalitions, but any place where more than one person is getting together to do something, that's a space for people to get on the same page and evaluate what happened before and how are we going to move forward.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you to you both. Can
I actually jump in and interject? Because we were talking, a little earlier about having this be a conversation, and I really want people to hear about you. And because, Saudi here has been doing some great coalition work ourselves. It's not just the two of us. So I'd like to hear, I think it was the second question, or maybe the first one, but what's the what's the coalition work that you've been engaged in?
Thank you. That's a great one. I was gonna keep asking y'all questions, but I like this. So I engage in coalition work at my day job, my formal job, which is with an organization called Scholars for Social Justice. It is a progressive leftist Black feminist network of faculty members all across the U.S. at different universities. And as some of you might know, there is an ongoing attack on higher ed in the United States. Authoritarian governments around the globe, one of the first things that they do is attack centers of knowledge and centers of free thinking, like the university. The U.S. university is extremely imperfect, but it is a site of knowledge where Black, ethnic, women's studies, queer studies, trans studies has been able to take root. And so my current work is defending faculty members who are in the line of fire against attacks from the federal government and even from within their universities. And I come into this work because I myself was supposed to be a faculty member, but I actually left my faculty job because I saw the attacks that were coming and felt the urgency to organize as a lifestyle. I made a choice to leave my academic job and organize because it felt that if there wasn't enough resistance as a profession, we were not gonna survive. And the things that we have seen over the past 8 months made it clear that that was the case. And so the coalition work that I'm doing now at this very moment is actually bringing partners from the higher ed ecosystem together to have visioning conversations about what is the future that we want for higher ed in this country. I have my particular vision, but folks will come with their visions, right? And I've already been experimenting in smaller ways with how to do that. So this spring, I was able to be part of a coalition that organized a day of action around higher ed on April 17th. And we had more than 200 actions across campuses in the US, highlighting the need for academic freedom, hands off our students, no attacks on our international students on campus, and also highlighting the need to support the Palestinian liberation movement on our campuses and beyond. And so that was a beautiful experiment, and it all, really revolved around building those relationships, right? Like putting in that FaceTime and being like, yeah, I'm gonna come to your webinar. Yep, I'll be there at your event. Yes, we will co-sponsor your event and share it with our list. Yes, we want to sit together and figure out a plan of action for that day, right? But then beyond that day, now we're in the phase of how do we actually make a permanent, sustainable coalition that can drive change on our campuses and change at the state level and change at the federal level. And then on the other hand, so that's one part of the work, right, that involves labor unions, it involves organizing groups on campuses, it involves faculty groups on campuses. The other part of the work, and this is all very fresh, is a brand new project, is actually organizing Black student union leaders on campuses across the US. Because Black students are on the front lines of the attack to defund, privatize, and destroy our universities. Black young women actually end up with the highest amount of student debt after college. So overpriced degrees, student debt, and now an aggressive push to delegitimize the presence of Black students in particular on our college campuses. And so there is now an ongoing emerging coalition building effort to bring on board Black students from across the US into organizing. And then a lot of people in New York, of course, know me because of the work of Encultured Company, which is a Dominican Haitian Solidarity Collective. And there is a mixed group of both Dominicans and Haitians, and also, beautifully enough, people who are Dominican and Haitian. So there, we're actually having those difficult conversations around colorism and anti-Blackness and anti-Haitian sentiment and anti-migrant sentiment, and working that out within ourselves, building strong relationships within ourselves as a collective, but then also bringing a healing justice approach more broadly to our community through spaces, trainings, conferences. Right now, we're training 10 leaders a week to deal with the challenges that are gonna come after the TPS revocation in our communities. And so a lot of my work is the work of people. I love people, actually. I'm an extrovert. And so I actually do enjoy facilitation. That was my favorite part about, the professor track, was actually working with students, being in the classroom, facilitating learning. And so I'm still doing that work. It's just at a different scale at this point. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let me just ask. Yeah, and let's talk solidarity. And how has solidarity been expressed in the work that you do? What do you see as the challenges of solidarity in today's world? Or maybe let's even start, what's solidarity? Yeah, because we're talking radical solidarity, because there's radical and there's solidarity. So.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in with that. So, about 3.5 years ago, I pulled together some other people that I knew from my travels and paths doing cooperative, who were Black, doing cooperative work. And we had decided to form a global network of Black cooperatives and Black-led organizations that support cooperatives. Basically, I had been approached for many, many years by people who would say to me, I would love your help in our community in Detroit or in Colombia, to do what you've been doing, to start these cooperatives in our communities. But I didn't have the capacity to do that. And so I was just struggling, trying to stay afloat, in the Bronx. And then we said, you know what, I want to do this and, do this work, and we can support each other in getting to that next level. And so that was the formation of what is known as collective Diaspora. So we're this network of a cooperative of Black cooperatives and support groups. And within that, our focus is about, building this Pan-African network, of solidarity, where we are supporting each other. And what we're about is creating the resources, pooling the resources that we have. And so for us, it is a project of solidarity. It's about, being there for each other, and putting in that collective work. We have a responsibility to each other, and we want to see each other grow. So for us is what solidarity is about. It's putting that into action. And, at the same time, we are coming from different places. So, people love to say, yeah, we're all Black, but we're all Black in different places. And some of those places have more power than others. So I then, found myself having lots of conversations with one of our members in particular, who is part of she is a founder or co-founder of a network. They're a member of ours, so we're member-based. And so one of our members is dealing with the fact that they've got these cooperative farmers throughout the global South, on the African continent and in the Caribbean, and they're trying to build relations in Black communities in the United States. And so she would often find herself in conversations with Black, US-based organizations doing community development work, not in New York, but in other parts of the country, where there aren't, Black immigrant communities. And so she finds herself working with African-American groups, and some of these are very entrenched and based in nonprofit, they're nonprofit organizations. And so there's just a way of operating that for her was completely alien. One based in, being fully integrated into foundations, where she was not. That's not like a source of income for those groups. And then for the others is just like a cultural way of communication and operating. And it's something that, and I was born here in the US. I grew up here. So, but at the same time, I grew up in Dominican communities, in immigrant communities. So I grew up in the Bronx, in the South Bronx. So for me, I'm accustomed, like the approach was always like, you get to know each other, you get to know people. You stop by somebody's house without calling. You just show up, there's always food. These certain things that weren't necessarily what she was encountering with other groups. That was very much more professional, let's just jump in and get to the work and kind of skip around getting to know each other. And so there were practices that she was accustomed to. And so I found myself in this position of having to be kind of like a translator, a translator between different groups and people, and acting as a bridge. So I feel that and that's a challenge, but it's important I think it's important that people recognize it, because I've also been in situations not in this particular circle, but in a broader circle of Black groups doing cooperative work, who are in the U.S., who want to be directly connected to Africa and who go to Africa, and who, kind of don't have very romantic ideas about being connected to the motherland. It's like we're going to take a trip and we're all going to go, and then having conversations about buying up land kind of en masse without any kind of, awareness about the potential downsides, the impacts of that. Like, it's one thing to want to be connected to your motherland. It's another to show up as a colonialist yourself. And so those are conversations that when we have these romantic ideas about solidarity, without being present to the on-the-ground reality that we're coming from different places, and there's different power dynamics and different incomes and different wealth and practices, that if we're not present to it and don't question it, then it's very easy to replicate old patterns and become oppressors, even when we think we're all working together.
Yeah, speak on it. I think that I really loved what you said around this being a lifestyle. This is not a one-time thing. Solidarity is not a one-time event. When I was young, I was 17 and going to college. My college had what we call the Third World Transition Program, which was an orientation program for students of color. And one of the themes that we had when I became a facilitator in my second year was standing at the edge of each other's battles. And this idea really stuck with me over the years, because in this country, something that I didn't know, because I'm also an immigrant, I arrived in the city in 2003. So I didn't realize that as a person of another part of the Black diaspora, I was walking into a live, long-term, ongoing struggle between white supremacy and Black liberation in this country. And that's not something that I was being told when I was 11 years old, because, there was no Black studies at my middle school, right? But that is what you end up walking into, and without awareness of that, we sometimes can end up making life decisions that steer us away from our culture, which is a culture of solidarity, right? I grew up in a house where there was always an extra plate of food because someone could just walk in and not have to ask for food, but the food was already there in case they needed some, right? Like, that was the type of environment that I grew up in. And so I think that there's a way that without that awareness, without that intentionality, without that self-reflection on identity, but also class and imperialism, people of color in this country and Black diaspora people in this country can actually end up further away from a culture of solidarity and a lifestyle of solidarity. Because also, life is hard. Everyone is struggling, right? There is no middle class in this country. People are trying to survive, and time is limited, resources are limited, and that is where we are, and that's where they have put us intentionally. So that creates even more individualism. So I think that the lifestyle and the choice is a choice to be grounded strongly in our culture, which is a culture of solidarity, and to intentionally refuse the constant message that we're getting, whether on social media or other places, about our worth, and also about our capacity to be in solidarity with other people. Even with us within the diaspora, like, there's a discourse around a diaspora war that is continuously surfacing on social media constantly. And so, yeah, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I think that we each individually have to make that decision that actually I'm gonna lean on my culture, and I'm gonna lean on elements that maybe are not visible but are supportive of me, so that I can be generous right? I can be generous with my time. I can find a way to find the resources and the time to be generous and to show up for the people who are most vulnerable. People who are most vulnerable. And decentering ourselves. We don't live in a culture of decentering. We have an app where that's where we're supposed to post all of our feelings, all of our thoughts, all of our selfies. I love a selfie, but everybody doesn't need to see my selfies all the time, right? Like there is a literal culture of attention where we're supposed to always be the center of that attention to get our validation as human beings. Meanwhile, that's taking away mental energy from us building a culture of solidarity, an identity of solidarity. So it is an upward struggle because the elements in our society that inform how we live are not interested in us shifting from individualism to solidarity. And they will punish us like they're punishing folks for being in solidarity with Palestine right now. They will punish us.
So this is just sort of my contribution to this discussion about solidarity, and I think the contributions you made quite brilliant and inspiring. So when you look in today's world, solidarity is the sexiest word being used, across the world. So every day you get tons of requests to like, to retweet, to comment, and we consider those forms of solidarity. They might be, but the kinds of solidarity we need in today's world is beyond clicks, is beyond retweets on social media. And both of you have talked about the kinds of solidarity that we need in today's world. And I've been involved in work around solidarity. And to look at 3 principles that underpin or should provide a framework for the expression of solidarity. The first one is deference, which is deferring to those who are on the front lines to determine how they want solidarity to be expressed. And why is deference important? Deference is important because of the point that you make earlier, that often, because of positionality, people express solidarity without actually asking those who need solidarity how they want the solidarity to be expressed. And this is something but the African diaspora and those on the continent would need to have strong conversations about. That don't sit in the US, don't sit in Asia or out of Africa, advocating for causes without actually touching base with those who are on the front lines, asking them, what are your needs and what are your priorities and how you want us to stand with you in solidarity. So deferring to them. And a classic example we often use is sometimes we think protest, is the best response to maybe an activist that is in incarceration. Sometimes those protests could be injurious. Maybe those who are actually in incarceration don't want you to protest for them. Maybe they want to be there as a way of symbolic action. And so it's important that we defer. And the only way we can defer to those people is if there's a relationship. And that's why coalitions that last, movements that last, are movements that are anchored and built on relationships. And we talked about value-based relationships. So that's the first principle, deference. The second one is difference. And this draws inspiration from Audre Lorde's Master's House. You cannot destroy the Master's House with the Master's tools. You either have to change the tools or perhaps bring down the house. Some of us believe you need to bring down the house. And it's the fact that we are different. And you make the point that despite our difference, that we can build collective strength from each other if we act together. That we need to acknowledge that this difference that we have is really a strength. And when we stand in solidarity with each other despite these differences, it builds the power that we need. The third one, which is linked to the second principle of difference, is disagreement. This is the most difficult expression of solidarity. How do you stand in solidarity with people that you disagree with? That is the real conversation in today's world. Do you need to agree with people before you stand in solidarity with them? Often, we don't need to agree with people. That even when we disagree, the fact that someone is a human being and they are facing and dealing with all forms of oppression is enough reason why we should stand in solidarity with them. And that in this case, regardless of their identities, the moment you're a human being, we've got to stand in solidarity with each other. So today's world actually requires these new expressions of solidarity. And that's difference, and disagreement. These are three sort of principles. We call them the 3D principles of standing and expressing rigorous solidarity, because that's the only bulwark that we have and we can anchor against all these forms of authoritarian tendencies across the world. So that's my contribution to it.
That was fantastic. Thank you both. So I think that we are about at time, but we have time for questions. So we want to, create some space for the audience. Yeah. There's a mic. Thank you all for already grateful for your questions.
First, thank you for this vital conversation. In the context of rising despair, self-interest at times rooted in basic survival, can you speak more about the role of inspiration? How do we inspire people to get involved when they're at times just trying to survive? Then also, what role can artists play in this enhanced inspiration?
I think art is essential. It's how we envision the world. It's where, whatever kind of art, it's when people feel relaxed and have a moment where you can kind of just play with your thoughts. I'll share one event that I got to repeat a few times that was bringing art into a space, and that was after Hurricane Sandy hit New York City in 2012. I was, doing this co-op development work that I was talking about earlier, and I thought to myself, when it happened, immediately people always kind of jump into action. There are always people that come out, solidarity, like I'm gonna help my neighbor, we're gonna get through this together. But everybody doesn't. And then there are people who are just struggling and treat it like, they're on their own. But when it happened, it got me thinking, what could I do? What can I do that would, have people see what cooperation actually looks like in practice? The kind of thing that motivates you to go out, not just to go out to start up a business with a group of people, but to go out and help your neighbor, do something together. And so I came up with I put out this idea, and as a group we did it. We put on a festival, and the idea for the festival was centered around creating a collective pot of food, of stew. And in Dominican Republic and other parts of Latin America, there's a dish called sancocho. And so sancocho is like a hodgepodge of a whole kind, lots of plátano, yuca, root vegetables, and other foods that all go into this pot. And it's traditionally, you make a big pot of it. And so anything big is a collective effort. And so we based the festival around having people put together, make this sancocho, and what we eat is going to be based on what people put in. And so the festival was free, and we said, it's free to come in, but you got to put something into this festival. You got to bring something for the pot, or you got to do some kind of activity. And so people came, and they brought their talents. People doing impromptu things with kids, with soccer balls, or games, or art. and music, spoken word, everything that people would willing to contribute. People would walk in and we'd say, here's a list of ingredients that are still missing. They'd go around and say, oh, okay, I'll go to the bodega, come back with a bag of rice, and other things. And so that, it was kind of just, we just put an idea out and inspired people when they walk in and say, oh, okay, I see what this is. This is not just me walking in and getting something for free. I got to contribute to something, but this looks like fun. So I'm going to jump in because I want to have fun. So it's just that moment when you give people the space to be free and have fun, and people wind up doing their own art. So, for me, that's art, and it was creating that space for people. And we need those kind of spaces because just having, 3 people in a room all day, every day, gets really boring.
Can I just chime in? Thank you very much for that question. When you think about arts, aside inspiration, let me preface my intervention by saying this. For those of you who are in this room, even though we're a small number, you guys are the rock stars. And I'm very delighted that you're sitting to listen to this, because where revolution took place across the world, if you've studied revolution, it didn't take numbers. It took just a few people who were present and willing to actually listen and learn. But if Burna Boy were coming here, let's assume Burna Boy was the one going to be here, right? Or Davido, or Wizkid, or who else? This room will be full, right? It will be full. I'm not saying, because Gen Zs might kill me for this, but it's music. It's not trash music, but I think that sometimes they sing songs that are quite inspiring and get people politically conscious. I think artists can really help people think differently about society, because underlying struggles are structural grievances. And the way, whether music or art, can articulate those structural grievances and provide deep explanation in a way that people can connect to a struggle, I think it will do that better than what we can say or what we do. So I think artists have a critical role, to play. Secondly, if you think about energy levels, most protests across Africa, let's begin. If you think about the Safe Senegal protest last year, in Senegal. In fact, before that protest, if you heard about the Yanama movement, how they used music, to get people politically conscious. And that's why Bob Marley will say, there's a reason why he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. There's no one who listens to those wordings that won't think differently, especially if you care about, the state of society. So I think it does, whether visual or performing arts, whatever type of art, you do have a role to play. And like Titi mentioned, you can't talk about movements without art. If you've ever been to Cape Town, if you've been to Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was in incarceration, and you learn about his story, you discover that in prison in Robben Island, the prisoners were using stones. They were singing songs, and those songs were a huge source, not just of inspiration, but of resilience. So you do have a role to play. Please keep doing the great work that you do. But you need to underline that with some form of political education, especially if you're working in very challenging context, a place like whether Cameroon or Uganda, where you have state repression. I think arts and culture give you a space into the room to talk to authoritarians, but there has to be an underlying political education that helps liberate people from the shackles of oppression.
Can I actually do an appendix to that, or just an add-on? So I was thinking now about, me as a kid and actually what got me into social justice, and it was the X-Men. So X-Men was a comic book series, and it was the X-Men, and it was hip hop in the late 1980s. And so, I grew up at a time as an early teenager when I remember where hip hop was it was Afrocentric, It was Public Enemy, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, the Jungle Brothers, a whole crew of people that I was into, where I, as a young person, felt like these are my people. This is my tribe. It's safe for me, you know, to care about being black, you know, and to care about myself, and I see other people, you know, like me. And as an even younger child, you know, as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, reading the X-Men series, for me, it was a story about, this is a story about mutants and humans, you know, non-mutants, and I saw in there complete, and it was an intentional allegory around race relations, you know, at the time. And so I saw in that just this dichotomy and the stories of oppression that were very visible and on the page, without saying, you know, this is about, you know, black people and white people, and this is about race relations, but you know, all of the elements were there for me to see my own life in this story, even though the story was about fantastical people and creatures and beings in other places.
We'll take one more question. This question was already answered, so we're gonna...
Thank you so much for this just really rich conversation. I have a couple of questions, but you can just answer whatever sort of calls to you. I'm curious, as organizers, as coalition builders, what role does restoration or restorative practice, you know, what ways does that show up for you? And then I had a question about when you're working with communities and individuals, in some cases with really entrenched stereotypes or hatred and things like that. I'm curious, any suggestions for navigating that? And then my last question was, you know, we're at a point where thinking through struggles, the Palestinian struggle, you know, the Sudanese struggle. Curious what your thoughts on how some struggles are highlighted versus other struggles at this point in time. Thank you. My name's Nsinga.
I can definitely speak to that question because of the work of Encultured Company. We get a lot of hate from Dominicans in particular who really, really don't like the kind of work that we do because of the historical experience of miseducation and really the building of a nation that privileged lighter-skinned people and did not offer any opportunities for social mobility for Haitian people in the Dominican Republic at all. And so we're really kind of questioning the whole architecture of society, the knowledge structure of the society, and the identity of our own people. And that has been really challenging. And so I think that the way that we've decided to approach this is through a healing justice perspective, to say we're not gonna reach every single person, but we are gonna create these spaces for Dominicans to work through their things, right? We have a conference coming up, actually October 4th and 5th in East Harlem, that's gonna have affinity group spaces for folks to work through their things, but also understand that Haitian folks need a different kind of resourcing. And so we're developing resourcing that's specific to the needs of Haitians in Haiti, but also Haitians in diaspora. And so I think that healing justice approach allows me to consider how do we actually create a safe space for people to talk about what hurts, because even folks who are in that condition of hatred and oppression are also people who are hurting and hurt and need something, but have decided that someone else has what they need, and so they should hate that person for that, right? Whether that's more capital or more resources or more privilege or more access. And so it's been really hard because sometimes I want to lash out too and go wild in the DMs, right? But I can't do that. That's not my job. My job is to hold space for the people who do want to have the conversations and who do want to be held and who want to open up and change. I also really hold the belief that transformation really is possible for every single person in this planet. And that's not always an easy thing to hold because some of it, what's going on is really painful and hurtful and difficult. But I think as an abolitionist organizer and as a visionary organizer, I have to believe that transformation and change are possible. Even when I feel angry and triggered and upset, And then that means that I have more work to do for myself, to hold people with compassion. And that's really difficult work. So that's a great question. Thank you for kind of bringing it up. And yeah, what do you all think?
Well, just the last question you asked about why are some struggles, some movements better amplified than the others? And I'll say it depends. But I'll just, in response to just three things. The first one is that's an opportunity for solidarity. Now, when you look at the struggles, when the Gen Zs are on the streets in Kenya protesting the Reject Finance Bill, one of the reasons why, it got global attention was because you had the Kenyan diaspora and you had the media playing a critical role in that. So perhaps a movement would want to consider who are they building alliances with, and whether those alliances are amplifying, their struggle, and media does play a critical role. There's also the tactic employed by a particular movement. There are some movements don't want public attention, right? It doesn't mean that they are not actively organizing. It's a judgment call that the movement leaders are making. And the fact that your struggle is not reported in the press does not mean that you're not doing things rightly. It depends, and that's why I said it depends. There are some cases where it is what CNN wants the world to see about Africa that they project. Is what Al Jazeera and the other parts of other sort of media try to project. But what technology has done is giving us the tool, to create our own media and document and project our struggles in a way that, they capture attention. Yes, the likes of Elon Musk and co are tinkering with the algorithms, but it's a wake-up call. We have to think about how we project our struggles. And I think the last point I'll make is DJ Khaled said, all I do is win, win, win no matter what. In a struggle, you don't always win. There are times that you lose, and the fact that you lose does not mean you're not doing things right. It's just that organizing itself is walking a terrain of uncertainty. So don't let that discourage you because you're either not heard or you're not being visible. No, you're walking in a terrain of uncertainties and anything can happen. Does that make sense to you? All right.
I was just imagining if the song went, all I do is lose, lose, win, lose no matter what.
I think it would be less exciting of a song if that was the song.
We wouldn't be jumping up and down in the club. I would add, on the restorative piece, that it is a skill that we don't have. We often do not have, but it is essential in movements. It is essential in organizations. I mean, it's essential where you got two people in a family. It's unfortunately a practice that we don't use. I've been on many sides of that. I've been a mediator. I've been the mediated. I've been, the person who's been canceled. I've been the person who's been, defensive, and your person who's a bridge builder. And it's hard. It's hard, and there are always feelings are at the core. They're always involved, and it's all about their unmet needs. And I'm talking on the interpersonal level. What Saudi was speaking to more was in terms of groups. But even there, it's still, if you don't have the skill on the interpersonal level, then that's not you. Then you don't have it to be able to bring groups of people together. People who've been at odds with their power differences, and there's long histories, and within organizations, it's easy, especially now. It's really easy to cancel people. It's really easy, where we hear the message of just like, cut people off, set your boundaries, and then walk off into the sunrise or sunset, and everything will be fine. But if we're committed to justice and we're committed to a future world, unless that future world is just going to be you, in your VR headset, imagining things, then you got to deal with other people, and there's always going to be conflict. And so you got to make a choice. If I'm committed to this world with other people and in community and solidarity with other people, then I have to be committed to, I have to be committed to relationships where I have to look at myself in the mirror and say, how did I contribute to this problem? And there's always ways that we each contribute to this problem. I've contributed to many problems, and I've been on the receiving end, but I've contributed to problems. And so you got to be real with yourself about that. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you, the audience. This has been really delightful. I really learned a lot. So thank you. Thank you both.
We're going to give one roaring applause to Saudi Garcia, Samson Itodo, and Omar Freilla.